guess you were doing the entrepreneur thing. I'm curious, like, what have you found to be the most, like, personally, the most challenging piece of, say, working for yourself versus, say, working for someone else?
The most challenging piece with working for yourself, I'm going to say, is making sure that you work for yourself harder than you work for other people. Yeah, because you don't have anyone breathing down your neck telling you to get this thing done. You got to do that yourself, right? And I think a lot of times, if when we are our own boss, we don't work nearly as hard, causes us to not have the same level of impact and same outcomes as others when it comes to growing successful large scale types of companies. Yeah, so that's the hardest thing, waking up every day and working for myself just as hard as I work for someone else or harder.
Okay. And let me ask you this too, because at some point you met someone who you married. When you met your wife, how did that change how you pursued your entrepreneurial efforts?
I don't know if it changed it too much. I found myself explaining what an entrepreneur does way more. So I had to consider like that and consider. Yeah, I don't know if getting married and meeting my wife is what changed things. It was probably the kids piece. Yeah, the kids piece is what really changed things. Like getting married, because after we were married, we traveled to Europe and South America for a year, right? As with me as an entrepreneur and her running her own business too, right? So we still did a lot. So I kind of me and my family recruited her to the entrepreneurial space and converted her on that particular front, right? So I don't know if much changed from my perspective in terms of that, but doing time management and thinking about what changes when you have children and this other priority that's even higher than like fulfilling your goal as an entrepreneur in terms of what you want to accomplish in this world. That was the real game changer in life.
How long were you and your wife married before you had your first child?
Let's see, 3 years, 3.5.
What was like the biggest sort of like, because I've talked to a couple parents on the podcast, and I always like to tease parents for certain, just because like the reality is you have these kids, and I know when you as a couple have kids, nothing is the same. I'm curious, like, what really, say, for you as a husband changed that you maybe didn't like really think or anticipate once the kid arrived?
How much you love them. Yeah, like that was a big thing for me, is not having experienced that type of love before, that raw sense of emotion on that level, right? Because romantic love, some form or fashion, you've experienced that you're in your life starting age 12. I don't know, with some younger age, you had a crush on somebody or whatever, right? Now the intensity of it varies in terms of what it actually looks like, but you've kind of been experiencing that throughout life. But when you have a child, that's an emotion that you've never really experienced before. And when you think about like this idea of like creation, right, of an actual person, this like being that you created, and then this woman that helped create this being and did basically most of the work in terms of carrying it and getting it to this world that a lot of times looks like you. In my case, it did, right? That you just love. You hear her cry. That was the most joyful moment of my life, was when my daughter was born, and then subsequently when my son was born. Those definitely the two happiest moments of my life, right? So just that level of joy that comes with being like a parent, and like that level of love that you didn't know that you had for someone else. It's something that I could never explain beforehand, and I wouldn't even try to explain, in terms of what it feels like, because I remember having that same feeling, like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm gonna love this. Oh, okay, yeah. But then like you hear the heartbeat for the first time, in the doctor, then you hear them cry for the first time, and then now just you got these two beings. I have these two beings here that I just love beyond anything, ever. Yeah. So that's like emotionally the biggest change that has ever occurred.
But you did mention the kids is sort of what made you pivot back, or pivot sort of your how you were making money for the household. You started to think about like bigger picture maybe, or just a different perspective on life now that you have different responsibilities. How did you fall into this investment sort of opportunity, given that you had the background, living the entrepreneurial life with the travel? How did you end up getting to a point where you said, I think this makes sense for me?
So we were living overseas even though we traveled for a year, we settled in Medellin, Colombia. So we were in Medellin for 4 years, and our children were actually born in Medellin, Right, so they're dual citizens between the United States and Medellin, and I thought I was going to be in Medellin for many years to come, but then COVID happened, and then my dad got sick too. He was overcoming, he was battling prostate cancer or whatever, right? So it was a combination of COVID, my parents getting older, and Carlos, my wife's parents, getting older, and then having like these new children. I wanted what I love more than Medellin was the idea of my kids knowing their grandparents, right? So it was with that we decided to move from Medellin back to Texas, to be closer to family, that type of thing, right? I would also say that in my latest business with my brother, called the Black Business School, that we started about 6 years ago, we've done really well with that. We've bootstrapped that. So what we do is help African Americans to obtain a culturally relevant yet practical education in all things wealth building at an affordable price. So we've been really successful in terms of bootstrapping that to millions of dollars of revenue, 150,000 students over the last 6 years or so, and that's great. And I love the impact. I love the community and impact that we've actually made on that particular front. But I still wanted to do something a little bit bigger, right? So instead of talking about 7-figure types of companies, what it would be like to own and operate a 9-figure type of business, right? And I didn't know how to make companies grow from 7 figures to 9 figures, and I didn't know how companies are actually funded to make that happen, because we bootstrapped our business to the point where it is now. So that's when I decided to make that pivot, to make that switch from entrepreneurship to investing, to learn how to scale an individual company beyond 7 figures, and seeing what type of impact that can have on the community, but then also from a personal legacy wealth building type of standpoint as well.
So let's talk about some of that a little bit, like, because you've built different businesses, like very difficult to do just once. And I think one of the most difficult things in business is the art of selling, having clients, finding who your customer base is. Like, can we just talk about how important it is to understand if you have a demand for what you're offering, and how you maybe find the people who are looking for what it is that you want to bring to the market?
It's the most important thing in business. Literally, when I talk to people now so this is the first time I've actually ever been an employee. So I started working at where I do now when I was 38 years old. And I see things from a different perspective. And I get to see a lot of different companies now. I think for Black people, the two most important things that they could do is, one, get ownership in assets that are increasing in value. And then two, learn how to acquire a customer, right? Like, those are the two biggest and most important skills from wealth building standpoint that I think that any Black person should be really be pursuing. So customer acquisition is so key in really understanding your target customer in terms of who your audience is, who your target audience is, and then going deep in terms of what do they believe, what do they care about, who are their role models, what are they thinking, what are their fears, what are their aspirations. Just thinking through all of that to the point where you become that individual. And it's through that identification and that discovery, you are able to craft offers and things that resonate with that particular group, so you can actually sell them something of value. And the process of that discovery is the most important skill, I think, in business. I don't care what anyone says, you have to learn how to sell customers and deeply understand their needs, to service them, and also to get their money for something of value.
In your personal experience, what are some of the character traits that or just skills that help do that to the best of your to do that at its highest level, in your opinion?
I would say ask good questions, listen, and then learn how to synthesize what you hear into something that is actionable, because that's where the product development piece actually comes into play. But listening and asking good questions is the key to that discovery process. And also observing too, though, right? So you can ask people good questions, but you can also observe their behaviors, observe their actions as well. I think that's most important.
And the other thing you mentioned outside of customer acquisition was assets. Like, when we talk about assets, I'm curious, different types of assets that we can invest in.